By 1964, the United States had been drawn deep into Vietnam's orbit. For nearly a decade, American advisors, helicopters, and money had tried, and failed, to build a stable South. Now, events in a distant stretch of water would provide the spark that turned advice into war. The Gulf of Tonkin, a quiet expanse of the South China Sea off Vietnam's northern coast. On the night of August 2, 1964, the American destroyer USS Maddox patrolled these waters on a routine intelligence mission. 3 North Vietnamese torpedo boats approached. Shots were fired. Radar screens lit up. The Maddox opened fire, and within minutes, 2 of the enemy boats were damaged, 1 sunk. 2 days later, the Maddox, now joined by another ship, the USS Turner Joy, reported a second attack in rough seas and darkness. Radar and sonar readings were confused, visibility poor. Some sailors later questioned whether an attack had even occurred. But in Washington, the incident was presented as clear aggression. President Lyndon Baines Johnson, who had taken office after Kennedy's assassination, seized the moment. On August 7, 1964, Congress passed the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, authorizing the president to take all necessary measures to repel attacks and prevent further aggression. In reality, it was a blank check for war. Johnson promised restraint. Privately, he told advisers, "We're not going to send American boys 9 or 10,000 miles away to do what Asian boys ought to be doing for themselves." But even as he said the words, the first steps toward escalation were already underway. In early 1965, North Vietnamese forces intensified their campaign in the south. Bombings, ambushes, and political assassination surged. The government in Saigon, now a revolving door of generals and ministers, teetered on the brink of collapse. To Washington, it appeared that only direct American intervention could prevent South Vietnam from falling. The Cold War lens shaped every calculation. Johnson feared that losing Vietnam would embolden the Soviet Union and China, and damage America's credibility as the defender of the free world. He was haunted by the memory of appeasement in the 1930s, convinced that if the U.S. did not stand firm, communism would spread unchecked. And so, the president approved a series of air strikes against North Vietnam. The campaign was given a name, Operation Rolling Thunder, a massive, sustained bombing effort designed to cripple Hanoi's ability to wage war. Beginning in March 1965, American aircraft unleashed destruction on a scale Vietnam had never seen. Bridges, railways, supply depots, and power plants were struck again and again. In theory, the bombings would force North Vietnam to negotiate. In practice, they only deepened its resolve. For every bridge destroyed, new ones were built by hand. For every convoy lost, fresh supplies moved by night along the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Civilians fled to bomb shelters, farmers dug new fields, and the war became a test of endurance rather than technology. In Hanoi, Ho Chi Minh told his people, "We will fight, we will rebuild, and we will fight again." The North's strategy was simple: bleed the enemy until his will to fight collapsed, just as they had done with the French. Back in Washington, Johnson's advisers debated numbers, strategies, and timelines. But one question went largely unasked: could victory in Vietnam even be defined? Military commanders requested more troops, more air power, more resources. Each time, the answer was yes. On March 8, 1965, 2 battalions of U.S. Marines, nearly 3,500 men landed at Da Nang. Officially, they were there to protect the air base. Unofficially, America had entered the war. As the Marines stepped ashore, cameras rolled. Reporters captured smiling soldiers handing out candy to children, posing for photographs beside their gear. Back home, the images were broadcast as evidence of resolve and righteousness, America answering the call to defend freedom. Few realized that the landing marked the beginning of a war that would last a decade, claim millions of lives, and divide a nation. In the months that followed, troop numbers grew rapidly. By the end of 1965, more than 180,000 American soldiers were stationed in Vietnam. Air bases expanded, supply lines stretched across the Pacific, and entire new command structures were built almost overnight. But the enemy refused to fight the kind of war America expected. There were no front lines, no decisive battles, no clear victories. The Viet Cong and North Vietnamese forces struck, vanished, and reappeared elsewhere. Every village was a potential battlefield, every civilian a possible ally or spy. U.S. commanders measured success not in territory gained, but in body counts. War became arithmetic, a grim tally of the dead. Helicopters carried soldiers into firefights by day and the wounded out by night. Each victory seemed hollow, each promise of progress soon undone. To the American public, the war was still distant, framed by confident speeches and patriotic rhetoric. Television footage showed brave young men in the tropics, smiling for the camera. But to those on the ground, soldiers trudging through jungles and villages, never seeing the enemy, the reality was confusion and exhaustion. And for the Vietnamese people, North and South alike, it was a nightmare reborn. Bombs fell from the sky, homes burned once more, and the dream of independence turned again to survival. By the end of 1965, the die was cast. America was now fully committed. What began as a distant advisory mission had become a full-scale war. Each side was certain of its righteousness, and neither understood the other. For Washington, Vietnam was a test of will. For Hanoi, it was a test of existence. For the Vietnamese people caught between them, it was the price of history repeating itself. The world watched as one of the most powerful nations in history marched into a land of rice fields and rivers, determined to win a war that could not be measured in territory or treaties. Next, 1968. The year when the illusion of victory would shatter, and the Vietnam War would reveal its true cost. By the end of 1965, Vietnam was no longer a divided nation in crisis, it was a battlefield for the world's great powers. The French were gone. In their place stood the United States, armed, confident, and determined to succeed where empire had failed. But in the jungles and rice paddies, another story was being written, one of endurance, sacrifice, and quiet defiance. For every village destroyed, another would rebuild. For every soldier lost, another would rise. And for every victory claimed, the war's true cost grew heavier. The Americans came with helicopters, jet bombers, and boundless faith in technology. The Vietnamese fought with patience, cunning, and an unyielding belief that history was on their side. Neither fully understood the other, and neither would emerge unchanged. What began as a colonial rebellion had become a global confrontation. And as 1968 approached, the world would watch in horror and disbelief as the conflict reached its breaking point, a single offensive that shattered illusions, toppled leaders, and forever altered the course of the Vietnam War. This was only the beginning.